Hey and welcome to another tutorial. Today I will show you how to create this Windows 95 logo inside Microsoft Word using Visual Basic for applications, that is using macros. And as you can see, the one on the left is an image downloaded from the internet, the one on the right is the logo actually created inside Microsoft Word. So let's start with a blank document. I've already pasted the image one more time and let's examine this shape a little bit. So as you can see, there is this like a wavy look of the entire logo, and if you have ever seen a sine function, the sine function looks like this. You can see that this first part is very similar to the shape of the logo, of the distortion of the logo. The only difference is that it's upside down. This is +1 and here is -1, but that's fine because inside Microsoft Word the 0 positions is here and it goes down to positive values for y, so it's actually the very same looking shape. So let's try to draw something which has this wavy look. Let's try to draw something which will be distorted with this like a wave shape, and it will actually not be any kind of logo. We will start with like a line. So I have another blank document and I will create a new macro for this document which I will call draw Windows logo. I will create this macro and I will try to draw something, and in order to draw some multi-line I need an array which will hold all the points. So I will define new array of points maybe. I will go from maybe 0 to some value, maybe 100, and 1 to 2, that's x and y as a single, and I will probably have a new constant which I will set to number of points, and I will set this to 100, and I will use this as the size of the array just so I can change this anytime later on. Then I will have a new loop, so I will say for counter going from 0 to number of points. I want to set values for those arrays, so I will say next counter. Okay, so for the x value, so I will say array points, first is counter, second is 1 for x. I will just simply use the counter value, maybe multiply by 2, so it will go from position 0 to 200. The interesting part is for the y value. So for the y value, which has the second index of 2, I will use the sine function of counter. And if I just simply do it like this and hit play, it will do nothing because I have to of course draw the shape. So I'll say active document dot shapes dot add polyline. I believe it's polyline. Okay, polyline. I will insert set the array points as the parameter and say select. So again I will run this and I'm getting some tiny little line which is this wavy shape, but it's very small because it only goes from -1 to 1, so I have to multiply the sine function by some value, let's say times 20. And I will probably move it a little bit to the bottom, so I will add some static value, maybe +100 or +50. So if I run this again, I'm getting a nice looking shape, but it has, you know, hard edges because I don't have enough points. I would have to raise the number of points to maybe, I don't know, 256, so I can see all those details. Another way is probably to make the sine function a little bit smaller, so maybe not times 20 but only times 10. Okay, so let's see what this does. We have still a lot of wavy shapes. We want this to be more spaced apart. We want much less waves. So what I will do is I will not use the counter for the sine function, but counter times a smaller value. For example, counter times 0.1. That will have 10 less shapes or 10 less waves in the shape. In the end we will probably use something more like times 0.5, so we only have one part of the wave. But you get the point. By changing the value inside the sine function we can control how many waves do we want. By changing this multiplier we can set how big those waves will be, and so on. So what we want to draw is a rectangle-like shape or a square-like shape which will be distorted by the sine wave. So it will go like this, the first part of the rectangle, then I will move downwards and I will go backwards in the same shape and connect the first point with the last point to close the shape. And this shape will be of course then used to draw the Windows logo. Of course we will not use this big wave, but we will use only part of the wave, so it will be more like this. It will be changing very slowly as we will draw the logo. So let's try to change our code to draw this shape. So inside here I need few more variables. I will probably have a new variable half of points, which I will as double or integer, whatever. And I will set the number of points to be, half of points to be number of points divided by 2 minus 1. I will probably lower the number of points to maybe 100. So I will start with the first half point. So for counter going from 0 to half of points, so the first half of points will create this line on this wave on the top. I will set the x position. Okay, so let's define a few more variables. Let's define x start. Let's do it. Let's set it to 0 for now, and y start to maybe 0. Shape width to maybe, I don't know, 200 for now, and shape height maybe 200 as well for now. Okay, so the x position will be based on the x start plus the shape width, but we have to change the shape width based the second parameter based on the counter. So shape width dot times counter divided by number half of points. So counter divided by half of points will go from 0 to 1, and it will be multiplied by the shape width, and it will be added to the x start. So if I run this, I'm getting something. For the y, we will also add the y start plus the sin of some value. Will probably change this in the future, the strength of the sine wave, like this. So that's the first half of the shape. Let's copy paste this and draw the second half of the shape. So for the second half of the shape, we will go from number of points down to the half of the points. We cannot say down to, but we can say that the step is -1. This will cause the loop to go from number of points from the last point to the half of the points from the, from end to the half of the points. If I run this, it looks like one shape. That's because for the second part of the shape we have to move the y position based on the shape height. So we'll say y start plus shape height plus sine function, and you can see we have the first half going here and second half in here. I will probably make this multiplier of the sine wave a little bit bigger so we can see that everything looks fine. Later on we will change it. So we have this first half, second half. We need to go the second half to the other side. That should be fairly easy. We will just change the counter to be number of points minus counter, like this. If I do it, you can see it goes to the left side, but there is this line which should be straight, but it's not. That's because I have to change something, and I have to actually change two different things. When going from the second loop, I don't want to go to half of points because half of points is already taken from the first loop. So I will say half of points plus 1. The second thing to change is I don't want to go from number of points. I want to go from number of points -1 because the last point will be used to be connected from the first point. So I have to also adjust this loop to go number of points -1 minus counter. And if I run this, everything should look fine. You can see those edges are straight. It almost looks like as the shape is being connected or closed. That's just because that's a coincidence of drawing this from y starting from 0. If I draw it from position 10, for example, you will see it's no longer connected because we are starting from position 10, but the last point is not being initialized. It goes to position 0, 0. So I have to make sure that the last point is same as the first point, and I will do it by simply saying that the array counter number of points, this is the last point, is same as the first point, which has the index of 0.
and I will do this for both x and y. The second index is 2 for the y position. So if I run this, now it's connected. So we have this nice shape. We can of course tweak the values. We can change the shape to be much smaller, and as I draw the shape on different positions, you can see we are getting this shape all over the place. The problem is that the sine wave is drawn for individual shapes. We want the sine wave to be unaffected by the shape itself. It would be like a global parameter. So what we will do is we will take a look at the sine function, which right now takes a counter as an input. We don't want to take the counter, we want to take the x position as the input. So I will say this is the x position, it will be taken as an input instead of the counter. I will do it for both loops. If I delete everything and run this few more times for different values, you will see that now those shapes are being connected and drawn in a way how we want them to be drawn. So they are forming this continuous shape as we draw those shapes on different positions. So let's actually create another loop which will draw multiple shapes. If I take a look at this image, I can count there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 different columns. So what I will do is I will create a new loop. I will name this draw distorted rectangle. I'll create a new loop, so 4 counter columns, and I will hardcore everything because we will not change number of points. So going from 0 to 11, we will have 12 different objects. Down here I will say next counter columns, and I want to move this, setting the x and y start inside this loop. So I will set the x start based on the counter columns times the width of the shape width. So if I run this, I should get 12 different shapes being distorted by the sine wave. So let's talk about the actual size of the sine wave. I already have the sine wave drawn here, so in here I can show you that the size of one loop of the sine wave, this part which we want to be used, this is 360 degrees. But we don't want to work in degrees inside of Microsoft Word, we work in radians, so it's also 2 times pi. Of course, pi being 3 point, so it's 3.14, so 2 times 3.14 and so on. So we want to make sure that the size of our shape, so this is like position 0, and this is the width of the shape, so it's the number of smaller shapes times the size of the width of the smaller shape, equals to, this should be 2 times 3.14. So let's jump to this document and make sure that it is true. So I will take a look here, and instead of multiplying by 0.1, we will create a new value which will be sine wave size, and the sine wave size equals to number of shapes, which is 12 yes, times the size, the shape width, it's the size times 12, and we have to divide it by 2 pi, so divide it by 2 times 3.14, and some numbers. Okay, so we will multiply it by this sine wave size, sorry, not multiply it, but divide it by the sine wave size. And if everything is right, we will get this nice looking wavy shape which has the one part of the sine wave. I will probably change this code a little bit to move it more to the bottom, so I will set the y start to be not 10 but 50 for now, like this, and I'm getting a nice looking part of the Windows logo. So all that's needed is to have another loop which will not loop for the columns but for the rows instead. So inside here I will have another loop. I will say 4 counter rows going from 0 to some value, and we have to count the number of rows, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So going from 0 to 6, I want to set next in here next counter rows, and the counter rows will set the Y position. So the Y style will be counter rows times shape height. And again, I will probably add some static value to this one just to make sure that it will not go outside of our boundaries of our document. So maybe plus 30 or so. That's a random value. So if I run this, I'm already getting a shape which is very similar to Windows logo shape. The only difference is the colors are missing, and if you take a closer look, first 6 or so shapes are in the smaller size. Before we change the size, let's actually plug in values which are more similar to the Windows logo. So the height should be around 24, and I will have another variables called sign strength, which will set the size of the wave, and it should be around 12 for the logo. So I will use the sign strength where I'm using 20 previously for both loops. Again, I will do a quick test of running this macro, and now the shape looks more of like a Windows. So let's again take a look at the actual Windows logo, and let's count the number of shapes which should be smaller. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The first 6 columns should be a little bit smaller. They should be resizing from some value to almost 100%, and the 7th column is actually being sized to 100%. So let's try to do this. Let's try to delete everything, and inside drawing this shape, I will say with this shape, I will not select it, but I will actually set the fill color for color objecting color probably to black for now, and I will do the same for line color just so it's same. And I will say that if counter columns is smaller than 6, then I want to resize the shape. So I will say resize, not resize but scale height. The factor will be a scale factor which we will define in a minute. Relative to original size should be set to false. We don't need it, but it has to be set. And the scale that's important should be set from middle, so it's scaling for the middle. I will copy this line and paste it again, and I will scale the width in the very same way. And I will of course say end if, and I will say end width. So I'm closing all those statements. So now I need to define the scale factor, and for this one I will use those counter columns. If I delete the counter columns by 6, I will get the value going from 0 to 1, which is what I need. I need a value going from 0 to 1, meaning from 0 to 100%. If I run this, you will see that I'm getting the first shape is actually being scaled to 0%, so it's not even visible. And the 6th or 7th shape, 1, 2, 3, 4, 7th shape is being scaled to 100%. I want this last shape to be a little bit smaller, and I want this first shape to be a little bit bigger just so it's even visible. So what I will do is I will multiply everything by, for example, 0.6. This way it will go from 0 to 0.6, and I will add some value, so maybe 0.3. So 0.3 plus this equation. So it will go from 0.3 to 0.3 plus 0.6, meaning it will go from 0.3 to 0.9. So if I run this again, you see that it goes from somehow small shape to almost 100%. And we are, almost ready. The only missing piece is making sure that the colors are right. The good thing is, or the nice thing, that the default color palette inside Microsoft Word has all those colors. It's the blue, orange, red, and yellow and blue. We just need to make sure that those are set to the right, parts of this window. So the top right part should be set to green, for example. And we can do this manually, but we have to also set the line color because we are using outline like this, or we can probably update our macro. The code is very simple, but it will take some time to write it, so I already have it pre-copied in my clipboard, so I will just paste it in here. I will say set colors, and I will just paste the code which I already have in my clipboard, and I will tell you what this is doing. So I do have the new array which has the very same dimensions as the number of shapes. It's actually going from 0 to 11, and this should be 0 to, the y should be only 0 to 6 probably. So I'm looping for every item in this array, and I'm resetting the value to 1, which is the object theme color of black, and then I'm individually setting different pieces of those array to different colors. So red has the number 6, green is 10, then blue is 5, and yellow is 8. So once I have everything set inside array colors, I will set and colors. I can use this array colors when I'm drawing those shapes. So I can say that the fill color should be array colors. First is counter columns, counter rows. Sorry, should be there. And I will use the very same for the line color. So if I run this, hopefully I should get the right colors for individual shapes. And that's exactly what I'm getting. If you are wondering why I'm using the outline for all those shapes, that's because if I don't use them, there will be small gaps. I can quickly show it to you. If I just say that the line shouldn't be visible, line visible to false, just because the word isn't very precise with drawing those shapes, you can see very tiny little hairline gaps, which are kind of distracting. So that's the reason why I'm using outline as well. So the only thing I would change or I would add would be to make sure that once everything is being drawn, it will be grouped. So once I draw the shape, I want this to be selected, so I'll say select, and I will add the optional parameter of false. That makes sure that the previously selection is being kept, and when everything is drawn outside all of those loops, I will say selection dot shape range dot group. So I will run this one more time, hopefully the last time. And here we have it, a nice looking Windows 95 logo. I'll probably change the page background color to some light gray like it was in the screenshot. And that's it. Thanks for watching. Also, if you can remember this Windows 95 logo, I have some bad news for you. You are at least as old as I am. I mean, as young as I am. Again, thanks for watching. See you next time.